Hickbun under the Heron Hignanáisiúnta. You're very, very welcome to the Permanent Mission of Ireland, to the United Nations, with our partners, the Irish Consortium on Gender-Based Violence, the National Women's Council of Ireland, and the Government of Sierra Leone. And I'm really delighted to welcome Minister Mahoy here. We've been at a few events over the past few weeks, and it's always an honour, a genuine honour, to share a platform with Minister Mahoy and with representatives of the Government of Sierra Leone. And we have a great partnership here and also in Freetown. It's been a busy 2 weeks for all of us. I think we're all starting to flag, but this is one event that I really, really wanted to do. I wanted to participate in and speak in, because it's of such importance, particularly at this time, as Róisín said. This morning we'll be hearing from partners, from NGOs and survivor organisations about the crucial role of survivor voices in efforts to eliminate gender-based violence. The elimination of gender-based violence for the Irish Government and for ourselves here at the Mission is both a domestic and a foreign policy priority. We recognise that it is fundamental to achieving gender parity and gender equality, and a genuinely necessary precondition for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Through our development cooperation, we're advocating for a survivor-centred approach to tackling gender-based and conflict-related sexual violence. We work with many valued partners, both civil and bilateral, to ensure that survivors have access to non-discriminatory, trauma-informed legal and sexual reproductive health services. Partners such as the Government of Sierra Leone, we're delighted, as I said, to have been represented today by Minister Mahoy. The Government of Ireland is also a very proud member of the Irish Consortium on Gender-Based Violence, working together with Irish humanitarian and development organisations to strengthen survivor-centred responses to addressing gender-based violence. As members, we are delighted to have played a part in supporting the development of the Consortium's recent survivor-led accountability research, a very valuable and important piece of work, a very important contribution to the field of gender-based violence, the findings of which we will hear more about shortly. This year's CSW, and I don't need to tell you all this, has taken place against the backdrop of a highly challenging context of ongoing conflicts, spreading conflicts, and humanitarian crises, which continue to exact their highest toll on women and girls. At the same time, we are marking the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration for Action, Platform for Action. And despite advances since 1995, and I think even though the mood is a bit downbeat at the moment, there have been huge advances since 1995. But in relation to violence against women, I think this remains one of the more widespread and persistent human rights violations across the world today, particularly in zones of conflict, but no country is in reach of eradication, Ireland included. When global funding towards this objective has been declining, as an international community, it is still our collective responsibility to work together to recommit towards the elimination of gender-based violence. At the centre of this are the women and girls, the survivors of gender-based violence themselves. Survivors must be at the forefront of our efforts and must be recognised as experts who should be meaningfully engaged in shaping our responses. And I will say, this is a tough time. We do feel multilateralism is under pressure. We feel international law and international human rights law and international humanitarian law are being disregarded and undermined. And it would be understandable to become despondent and to give up. But I think the words of Secretary General Guterres are absolutely important here. We respond with action. We don't get to choose the time we live in. This is the time we are here. This is the time we have to be active in, and we can either pack up our tents and leave the field of action, or drive on harder. And my view and the view of our government is we drive on harder. So with that, I want to thank you all for participating, for listening to the important discussion, both here in person and online. I think we have a really strong representation online. Just one piece of housekeeping: be aware that this event is being recorded, and be mindful of that. And with that, I'm delighted to hand over now to our keynote speaker, Katrien Coppens, Executive Director of the Mukwege Foundation. You're very, very welcome.
Thank you, Ambassador, Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I first want to thank the Irish Consortium on Gender-Based Violence to give me the floor at this important event on a topic very close to my heart and at the core of the mission of the Mukwege Foundation. gender-based violence survivors leading the way to change. The Mukwege Foundation works alongside survivors to change the global response to conflict-related sexual violence. And just echoing the words of the ambassador, we meet today a time when gender equality gains are being rolled back. Humanitarian aid budgets are slashed. We meet at a time when the pursuit of gender equality and justice has once again become a radical act. And the essential task we face is to amplify the voices of survivors as a critical constituency for justice and peace. As mentioned, in all current conflicts, we continue to see armed actors using rape and other forms of sexual violence to humiliate, dominate, spread fear, and displace targeted communities for ethnic persecution, punishment, power, or profit. And women and girls are the most frequent target. During last year's Security Council open debate on preventing sexual violence in conflict, the SRSG Pamela Patton remarked that in 2023, women and girls accounted for 95% of the verified cases. In 32% of these cases, the victims were children, with the vast majority being girls. We continue to hear brave testimonies from survivors in DRC, Sudan, Ukraine, Ethiopia, and many more countries. These crimes are often extremely brutal, committed in public, and have severe consequences beyond the survivors themselves. They cause the disintegration of communities and families. The consequences and trauma are multi-generational and far-reaching. Conflict-related sexual violence, when not timely and properly addressed, undermines the prospect of sustainable development and peace. We see this in Sudan today. More than 20 years ago, the Irish Consortium was actually created as a response to the high numbers of sexual violence faced by victims in Sudan. And what we see today is that heartbreaking to see that women and girls yet again face similar violence. Did we not see any progress? And I want to also follow up on what the ambassador said. We did. We have seen progress in both the normative framework to address conflict-related sexual violence, as well as efforts of supportive states, civil society actors, and survivors. They are increasingly boldly speaking, breaking the silence, and sharing their stories to the world. In the last two decades, we've seen increased numbers of indictments and convictions of perpetrators in both national, regional, and international courts. Some states are adding perpetrators of conflict-related sexual violence to their sanction lists. Others are using universal jurisdiction to bring perpetrators to justice and adopt legislation to recognize children born from war. We've also seen an increased recognition of the importance of reparations. But the reality check is bitter. The scourge of sexual violence, a true pandemic, continues to spread to all conflicts, and the response of governments is always too little, too late. Lack of both public awareness and political will to act, to prevent, respond, and hold perpetrators to account fuel the vicious circle of violence and impunity which we witness today. Particularly Sudan, DRC, I think are painful examples. It's a serious human tragedy, a crisis of our shared humanity that concerns us all. We need to step up efforts now. These crimes never happen accidentally. It's a choice to employ or tolerate them, and therefore they can be stopped. It's in this spirit that the Mukwege Foundation launched the Red Line Initiative, a global campaign to change the global response to the use of sexual violence in conflict. To close the awareness and accountability gap, the Mukwege Foundation published the Guidebook on State Responsibilities. And the guidebook shows that a robust framework exists with clear obligations for states in the areas of prevention, justice, accountability, response, and reparations. Members of SEMA, the Global Network of Victims and Survivors of Conflict-Related Sexual Violence, developed a global call to action based on these existing state obligations and use it to demand states to ensure their rights. And this leads me to the key topic of today, survivors leading the way to change gender-based violence. Not only do victims of sexual violence in conflict face a cascade of life-changing physical and psychological consequences, they are also confronted with the burden of being shunned and silenced by their own families and communities. Stigmatization prevents survivors from seeking help, excludes them from their communities, and often leaves them to care for themselves and their children without support. It means that the suffering and the devastating consequences of these crimes often remain hidden and unaddressed. This again fuels the cycle of impunity, preventing perpetrators to be held to account. It's crucial that the silence around sexual violence as a weapon is broken. As a survivor from Bosnia-Herzegovina told me, by speaking out, we are making sure that history cannot repeat itself. But what does that take? Based on our experience and existing evidence, connecting survivors through national networks, linking them to a global network, is key in overcoming stigma and securing the care and justice that survivors are entitled to. Survivor-led networks provide a safe space where survivors can share experiences, heal, and organize together to create change. By connecting with others who understand their experiences, heal, and organize to create change, survivors can find new strength, break the silence, and claim their rights. The positive impact of belonging to a network is well documented. Many network members reach a point where they feel empowered to testify about their experience, speak publicly at events, advocate for survivor support, and voice their needs. I want to share a short poem by Grace Chan, a member of the SEMA network. She said, "I am strong because life taught me to be. I am courageous, that's why I live. I call myself a heroine because of what I've overcome. I'm a leader, that's what I do." In 2017, the Mukwege Foundation initiated the establishment of SEMA, the Global Survivor Network. This network is rooted in survivor-led activist networks at local and national levels in 27 countries. These networks, that differ in size and maturity, from small groups of 20 women to networks of thousands of women. They offer peer support and a route for survivors to take the lead in fighting for their rights, shaping policies, and demanding justice. They strive for survivors to receive holistic care, compensation, and accountability. They support survivors' demands and work with them towards a future where sexual violence in conflict is recognized for what it is, a crime that should trigger serious consequences. They also try that policies and responses affecting them are adapted to the needs and aspirations of survivors. As a SEMA member from DRC says, "Nothing about us without us. It is so important that survivor voices are heard. Survivors tend not to be consulted but no one knows their pain, their needs better than they do. Many survivors have the ambition to share their experiences in order to spark action and debate. They aim to shift the narratives of conflicts. Still, often it's painted as sexual violence being an inevitable collateral damage of conflict. And one of the key drivers is often to ensure that what happened to them will not happen to others. When one survivor speaks out alone, it takes immense courage, while it's too easy to ignore. But when many voices rise together, they become impossible to ignore. And what is needed to support them? Priority must be given to investing in national and global survival movements, increasing longer-term flexible funding for grassroots survivor-led organizations on the front lines of conflict and crisis. This is essential for responding to survivor needs, amplify their voices, and ensuring their quest for justice and economic empowerment. While governments and civil society increasingly emphasize and recognize a survivor-centered approach, the most effective way to truly place survivors at the center of everything affecting them is by strengthening and expanding their own networks. It's crucial to ensure that timely and meaningful participation and representation in all programs and policies that affect them, justice processes and peace processes. A recent study on Sema-Ukraine, a network of Ukrainian survivors, shows that increasingly survivors are not only consulted in justice processes, but are actively shaping them, reinforcing the principle of survivor-led justice in Ukraine's response. Irina and Alisa Kovalenko, members of Sema-Ukraine's network, are here today and will share their experiences in the panel. In conclusion, survivor-led activism is one of the most powerful forces in the fight against conflict-related violence. Survivors have turned their trauma into action, challenging systems of impunity, influencing global policy, and empowering survivors to reclaim their lives. Their courage and resilience continue to drive change at the global, national, and international level. The examples I shared earlier reflect the transformational journey survivors to lead from silence to voice, from trauma to strength. They underscore how survivor-centered activism is not just about personal healing. It's about reshaping societies, influencing global policy, and ensuring that future generations inherit a more just and compassionate world. Survivors continue to push for justice, healing, and change. They learn us about persistence and growth in the face of hardship and pushback. One more quote from a survivor. It's time that survivors break the silence, but mostly it is time for the world to hear their voices. Survivor-led activism is driven by hope, and we cannot defy them. We have no choice but to continue to step up support survivors in their fight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katrien Coppens, the Executive Director of Mukwege Foundation, for those rousing words. We heard about the Red Line Initiative holding states accountable and the power of networks and survivors bringing about a new reality and a new society if they're listened to and acted upon. I now will call Ivanna Youtchak, who is the Ending Violence Against Women Coordinator for the National Women's Council of Ireland. The National Women's Council of Ireland is chair for the National Observatory on Violence Against Women and Girls, and Ivanna will share some research they're working on. The Observatory provides a vital space for organisations to work for improved policies, service provision and advocacy in support of a diversity of women victims, survivors of male violence. I call on Ivanna. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Róisín, and I will echo a lot of what has been said already. But first of all, I would like to thank the Permanent Mission of Ireland to the UN, Ambassador Mythen, and also the Minister Mahoy. We would also like to thank the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth. And of course, the audience. It is great that it got such a good turnout on the second week at the very end of these 2 weeks. So thank you so much for the co-sponsoring as well as the support. But I would like to thank particularly the Observatory on Violence Against Women, because I would speak about a collective process. And without their history on this, without their expertise, and without their collaboration and contributions, we wouldn't be where we are. So hopefully they are at the moment online attending. So as Róisín said, I will be speaking about an ongoing collective process of the Observatory in Ireland. I will present the Observatory literature review on survivor engagement strategies in government policy. We're, as speakers already said, we're living in a time where women's rights are under threat, and male violence against women is at crisis level, both in Ireland and internationally. Too often, survivors are left out of decisions that directly impact them. And this document that I'm presenting today is a part of a process of amplifying survivors' experiences and voices, as we believe that real change starts with survivors' voices as experts in decision-making spaces. So for those, it's actually the third, sorry. Yeah. For those who don't know us, the previous one, sorry. For those who don't know us, the National Women's Council is the leading representative organisation for women in Ireland with 190 group members. Our vision is of an Ireland and of a world where women can achieve their full potential in a just and equal society. As Róisín said, the National Women's Council chairs and convenes the National Observatory on Violence Against Women and Girls, which was established in 2002. The Observatory is an independent network of 35 grassroots and national organizations that come together regularly. This network provides an important space for organizations with a wide range of voices, including migrant women, women in prostitution, rural women, Roma and traveller women, to discuss domestic, sexual and gender-based violence issues. And I want to pause for a second, because I think that this diversity of voices means a lot to us when we're discussing survivor engagement structures, because it's a diversity of backgrounds and voices that we need to take into account when thinking about these issues. The next slide, please. So the purpose of this literature review is to explore the importance of embedding lived experience of the SGBV into government policy as experts through their own lived experience and expertise through a co-design process. It includes the analysis of research and great literature from government, the international development, humanitarian and the voluntary sector. The importance of women's voices and experiences in driving change is not new, as Katrien said, but the issue is how these experiences are or can be heard and meaningfully included. That is not obviously just consultation. The need for DSGVV survivors' experiences incorporated into government system is a long-standing call from the law sector, whether in family law courts, the criminal justice system, or prevention campaigns. It has also been identified as a need in several government reviews, and it is a core feature of the government third national strategy on DSGVV. And we're working, thankfully, on this with great openness and collaboration with CUAN, the newly established DSGVV agency. In Ireland so far, incorporating people with lived experience of DSGVV in most cases was driven by survivors sharing their individual painful stories and losses, and civil society organizations voicing systematic gaps and harmful practices in systems. Some examples that some of you might be familiar with, is the inclusion of survivors' voices into policy and legislation in recent years through the third national strategy, the supporting a victim's journey in sexual violence cases, the study on familicide and domestic and family violence death reviews. I think it's very important to highlight that our strategy, our third national strategy, is very much in line with the Council of Europe Istanbul Convention, and this is a very important international mechanism, and it has allowed us to go beyond as well in terms of the list of forms of violence against women, because our third national strategy includes sexual violence, domestic violence, FGM, human trafficking, and it includes prostitution as a form of violence against women, which goes beyond what the Istanbul Convention says. So again, I already spoke about diversity of voices. Now we're talking about different forms of violence against women, and all of this needs to be taken into account when thinking about structures. Next slide, please. So literature is clear that survivor-centered approaches are key in terms of best practice, the empowerment effect for survivors, efficiency and effectiveness in developing services and policy. Engaging survivors in co-production offers them the possibility of reauthoring their narratives, challenging the othering of victim survivors in society. Survivor voices are also essential to optimize the benefit of public spending, as meaningfully included survivor voice ensures early intervention is impactful and helps minimize the cost of the public purse. But literature is also clear that engaging with people with lived experience must address a number of barriers and considerations in civil society and in the public sector to engage in a meaningful, empowering, safe, trauma-informed, and non-tokenistic manner. More importantly, with an understanding that lived experience must be at the heart and start of all systems and services. This includes appropriate frameworks for managing physical and emotional survivor-led safety and supports, confidentiality, and practice non-discrimination. But also survivors need to be acknowledged as experts and therefore being paid for their time. The Irish Consortium on Gender-Based Violence launched research, and Róisín will be speaking about this shortly, including a gender equity continuum, which provided us a useful framework to discuss the current situation of DSGBV survivor engagement in Ireland. The mentioned government initiatives have incorporated voices into policy and legislation, but they were ad hoc initiatives reflecting that the Irish government at times has been survivor informed. In order to reduce pain, trauma, and to have more effective systems in place that incorporate lived experience, it is necessary to develop a more structured and sustainable way to embed and engage survivor experience. This report explores models with a more systematic and sustainable approach to engaging with survivors, with the ultimate goal of becoming more survivor-led. So this is the last piece of research that I mentioned. Dowling in her research provides three main models of victim-survivor engagement: direct engagement with survivors and victims, such as victim councils or panels, independent engagement mechanisms, such as victim commissioners, and forums of the DSGBV NGO and representative organizations. So the observatory analyzed a number of models, but in the interest of time, I will only focus on the highlights of the Victoria and Welsh models. So firstly, the Welsh model. In 2018, Wales developed a national survivor engagement framework, a government initiative to engage with survivors of violence against women, based on the need to make survivor engagement less ad hoc and to inform government policy. The national model has been evaluated and it offers learnings on particular national and regional issues with a clear commitment to engage survivors from many backgrounds. Voices is a place to ensure victims and survivors across England and Wales can engage with a domestic abuse commissioner. So this model includes both a survivor panel as well as a commissioner. Next slide, please. In 2016, the Victorian Regional Government established the Victim Survivors Advisory Council to ensure that their voices inform policy development and service delivery. This model provides a clear government mechanism, a survivor panel, and a chair with a statutory basis through which survivors' input is incorporated to develop and implement government policy. The council includes a range of diverse communities, including women, people of all ages, Aboriginal people, people with disability, people who have lost family members to family violence, people from multicultural and multi-faith backgrounds, and new migrants and LGBTI+ people. The model has undergone 2 reviews to understand its impact. They demonstrated how members help government to design improved policies and services to meet the needs of people with experience of the system. And they also demonstrated that engagement with the council has created cultural change and an increased willingness to share power in decision-making and reduce power imbalances between survivor advocates and government employees. This model also includes a family violence lived experience strategy. So to conclude, there are further specific considerations and opportunities to tailor and apply this model in the Irish context on the basis of international learning, such as the many survivor groups that are already in place, leaders that are already making a huge difference in Ireland. So this process will continue in the coming months to embed survivors' experiences in decision-making spaces in Ireland. So that's it. Thank you very much. And now I will introduce Róisín Gallagher, who has worked very, 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 very hard for this event to happen. Róisín is the coordinator of the Irish Consortium on Gender-Based Violence, with over 25 years humanitarian and development experience across Africa, Asia and the Middle East, Latin America and the Caribbean, with a focus on governance, gender equality and gender-based violence. Róisín holds a Bachelor of Design Communications and an LLM in International Human Rights, with her thesis on accountability for GBV survivors in Sierra Leone. So, very good today.
Thank you, Anna. It's me again. So the ICGBV, or the Irish Consortium on Gender-Based Violence, as Ambassador Mythen mentioned, is an alliance of 13 humanitarian and development organisations and includes Irish Aid and the Irish Defence Forces. And within the Beijing Platform for Action, it calls on us to produce research and to disseminate it widely. So we're here today, and I'm glad to uphold the Beijing Platform for Action in doing that. And I encourage you to read the research either at gbv.ie or you have Q codes on the table there. So first we look at key concepts from survivor-centred to survivor-led, and then I'll talk you through 4 case studies from Africa, Asia, the Middle East, South America and Europe. And there were 7 emerging studies came from that. I'll share the main findings, speak a bit about the operating context, and leave you with 3 recommendations. So survivor-centred and survivor-led accountability initiatives. Survivor-centred accountability initiatives date back to the 1970s, have become the gold standard in GBV accountability, as emphasised within UN Security Council Resolution 2467 and the CEDAW Committee in 2017. But we found that this phrase, survivor-centred, was too ambiguous in practice, and it wasn't often realised. So the ICGBV commissioned research to seek evidence of established and emerging cases of survivor-led research from which to inspire policy and programme change. The survivor-centred, we have a definition from the Mukwege Foundation that survivor-centred is where we accompany survivors' activism to determine their priorities and agendas. To be survivor-led would mean survivors are creating the spaces, priorities and decisions completely by themselves. In terms of accountability, our understanding of accountability includes and goes beyond legal and financial reparations, but encompasses all measures to address gender-based violence. So now we look at 4 case studies, and we are very privileged to have Irina Dovgan and Alyssa Kowalenko, who will speak on SEMA Ukraine. They are the experts there. The next slide, please. The Survivors Leadership Initiative, it had a really great impact in Somaliland, where after decades of lobbying, survivors of female genital mutilation and cutting were helping to produce the national anti-FGM policy, which is now underway in Somaliland. The third example was the National Survivors Networks, and Katrien elaborated very well on the national networks and how they connect to the global work to have greater impact. And the last example is the Murad Code, which was named after ISIS survivor Nadia Murad, who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2018, along with Dr. Denis Mukwege. The full name of the code is the Global Code of Conduct for Gathering and Using Information about Systematic and Conflict-Related Sexual Violence. Over 72 survivors from Bosnia-Herzegovina, Canada, Liberia were involved in every stages of the code. And in fact, Alyssa and Irina here today were also involved in the early stages of this code. In addition to the 4 case studies, we also identified 5 established and 2 emerging examples of promising leadership. I encourage you to read more in the paper. But we will be hearing from Ruth Quinn from the Global Survivors Fund, which is one of the established initiatives. And in the audience, we have Daniel Keetor, and I think Margaret is there as well, from the Rainbow Initiative in Sierra Leone. And they have a Survivor Solidarity Group, which is an emerging initiative of survivor-led response. On to the findings. We must avoid trophy survivors on occasional profile platforms, optics that has little to do with reconfigurating and validating the real expert power of survivors from within their own stories. As we've heard from Ivanna and from Katrien before, redistributing power begins with the recognition of survivors' status as experts based on their experience. However, we caution overburdening survivors. The battle to end GBV should not fall on them alone to fight. There have been many challenges, and some are very context specific, but the common challenges that we came across in the research included trauma, stigma that Katrien explained so eloquently earlier, lack of funding, which will come as no surprise, lack of technical skills for advocacy and policy work, and safety and well-being. And as Tavisha Navatia said, disclosing personal experience of violence is an individual choice that has the potential to bring healing. However, when my story was held with empathy, it brought healing. When I felt dismissed, it led to me shutting down. And the key findings of how survivors have overcome these challenges is through healing and collective healing. And again, Katrien spoke of the power of networks and collective work. Another finding we had, and it's linked to healing, but how survivors move on to become activists. In the beginning, we were victims just seeking assistance without any idea of becoming a group or being activists. Then we were helped and encouraged through counselling, and there was a healing process. From that, we thought about how to help others. As most initiatives are less than 5 years old, traditional ways of measuring impact are still emerging, but we will hear stories of impact shortly from our panel. Next slide, please. Ivanna mentioned the continuum. So we, in developing this, we wanted to assist practitioners and drew on WHO and UNFPA gender scales to produce a continuum. Is the next slide. Thank you. And this continuum goes from survivor blind up to survivor leadership. And we are looking at exploring further an earlier column that would look at survivor exploitative practices. Our research found that survivor-led approaches build on the foundation of survivor-centered work, which provides clarity and unlocks greater potential for transformative impact. So we are here in Beijing, and the context we are in 30 years on, while it's been elaborated by Ambassador Mythen and Katrien and others that there is the backsliding of gender equality, we are encouraged by the strong commitment made by member states last week, when in the political declaration, this is a quote, "We strongly reaffirm our political will and firm commitment to tackle violence against women." And of course, funding is an issue. I was here last year to talk about our latest research, at the time tracking the money to end GBV. And there we shared, despite the high cost GBV cost countries, and yet the funding for GBV was unacceptably low, 1%, less than 1% of overseas development aid and 0.69% of humanitarian aid. This was last year. Now, as you know, we have had severe cuts across the board to funding, decimating years of work. So on to our recommendations. We want to prioritise funding, long-term, flexible, unrestricted funding, particularly for women's-led and women's rights organisations partnering with survivor-led initiatives. For states to establish survivor engagement bodies such as advisory groups and committees, as Ivanna shared, and for practitioners to actively challenge the power dynamics that prevent, hinder or render survivor-led GBV initiatives invisible. Additional recommendations are in the paper I'd encourage you to read. And I'll finish and I'll let you read the quote from President of Ireland, Michael D. Higgins, who's also the patron of the Irish Consortium on Gender-Based Violence. as we set up for the panel discussion. Thank you. Now for the more interesting part, when we hear from the real experts. And I want to introduce our panel. We have Tinebe Burhan, the Country Director of ActionAid Ethiopia, a dedicated women and girls' rights activist with 27 years of experience in development and activism. She supports women, girls, and young people in fighting structural causes of poverty and injustice. And ActionAid Ethiopia works with women, girls, and marginalized communities to challenge violence and harmful practices, particularly in conflict and humanitarian settings. Ruth Quinn joined the Global Survivors Fund in 2023 as Senior Advocacy and Policy Officer, where she leads international advocacy on reparation financing for survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. Prior to joining GSF, Ruth worked with the United Nations Office on Counter-Terrorism on the protection and promotion of victim rights. We have Irina Dovgan, a Ukrainian conflict-related sexual violence survivor from the 2014 Russian invasion of eastern Ukraine. A graduate of Donetsk University, she built a diverse career before becoming actively involved in humanitarian aid efforts. She now leads SAMI Ukraine, an NGO of women survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, and is a dedicated advocate speaking internationally on human rights violations and survivor-led justice efforts. Beside her, we have Alyssa Kovalenko, an award-winning Ukrainian documentary filmmaker, and we're lucky to have a clip of Alyssa's latest film to show. And her works have been showcased at Berlinale, IDFA, and Hot Docs Film Festival, earning international recognition. Since 2019, Alyssa has been a board member of SAMI Ukraine, advocating for survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. And although not a translator, Alyssa has kindly offered to assist with translating Irina's comments here today, so we thank her for that. Thank you. So now the format is I'll pose a couple of questions to the panel, and then afterwards we'll open up to the floor. So the first question, and Tinebe, we'll start with you. What new or emerging initiative of survivor-led accountability can you share from ActionAid Ethiopia?
Thank you so much. Good morning, and thank you for coming to listen to our practical experiences. I would like to start by saying that what we have to collectively fight for is stopping, normalization of GBV, and especially in a very growing conflict settings in the world. So for us, survivor-led accountability, it starts with having a clear definition. We mean by empowering and capacitating survivors to engage, prioritize, oversee, and lead the process, the entire process to justice, response, and recovery. And that we always ensure that that is being made in a very dignified manner, as it is too personal matter, especially in such societies that are highly patriarchal. And it also has, if we don't do it that way, it has a potential danger in stigma and isolation if not handled carefully. For us in ActionAid, this is central to our protection work, where we use participatory methodologies and power analysis. We use various tools that survivors are the front line and actively involved in the design process of our programs, in the implementation process, decision-making, and final evaluation. I want to underline especially the power analysis because, as the former speaker said, it's a very practical challenge that, women who face GBV are silenced in so many ways, so not to speak up and not to report for the fear of stigma. And also there is a lot of structural violence committed by different stakeholders that these people, these women and girls, are not really having access to justice system. To give a practical example how we do it, when we provide humanitarian and cash assistance to GBV survivors, we start our work by establishing committee from the right holders. We call them right holders. receiving the cash assistance. They will be the ones identifying the targets, receiving the cash with our support and the local government as well, ensuring the transparency of the targeting process, receiving any complaints, oversee the cash distribution, and evaluate the program with what we call it participatory review and reflection process, PRRP. And we invest in making support safe and closest to where they are. For instance, if we are providing food and they are living in a far distance in a district than the center, we transport the items to the nearest possible area so that they will not be exposed for further violation. And if we are providing cash, we negotiate with the banks to open account and facilitate payments to the survivors. As it needs to be handled in a dignified manner, the right holders' names will not be revealed, rather it will be in codes. So the numbers are designating the names of the survivors. And when the targeting is done, although they know who specifically are the survivors, they will assess the whole neighborhood as a survey. In our reporting and documentation, we don't show the faces of the girls and the women. Rather, we are discreet by covering their faces and identity. In this way, we also apply safe programming approach because we make sure that our programs, our support, our interventions will not perpetuate further damage to their dignified situation of the women and girls.
Thank you, Tilda, for outlining that well. And now I pass to Ruth Quinn the same question. So what new or emerging initiatives of survivor-led accountability can you share from the Global Survivors Fund?
Thanks, Róisín. So the Global Survivors Fund was founded 5 years ago by Dr. Dennis Mukwege and Ms. Nadia Murad to answer a very critical question on what does justice mean for survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. And the response from our colleagues at the SEMA Network and other survivor activists was very clear. While criminal justice is important, it focuses on perpetrators rather than meeting survivors' urgent needs. Survivors overwhelmingly emphasize that reparations are crucial to rebuilding lives. And that is why GSF's work on reparations is structured around 3 key priorities. All of these priorities are guided by survivors. So we advocate for states to take up their responsibility to implement administrative reparation programs. We provide technical assistance to those states to design and implement these programs in a survivor-centered or survivor-led way. For example, drafting reparation laws in Guinea and Ukraine. And we act to provide what we call interim reparative measures. And interim, it's interim because really authorities have the responsibility to provide these measures, but survivors just cannot wait. Survivors have urgent needs. So in these projects, we don't only work with survivors, we work through a co-creation methodology, and it's that which is innovative and I want to speak to today. What this means in practice is that survivors meaningfully participate in every decision that affects them throughout the project. Survivors are involved from the beginning, defining what reparation means to them and participating in project design, implementation and monitoring. For example, survivors form part of project steering committee groups and they co-design survivor identification methodologies that are context appropriate. This process itself is reparative because it restores agency and ensures that measures are relevant, impactful and ultimately transformative. And I'd like to give just 2 quick examples here. The first is on Nigeria, where survivors who were targeted for pursuing education identify that to them, education and returning to school was a form of justice. Education itself is reparation, especially within adapted curricula, psychological support and age-appropriate learning spaces. And the second, I'd like to say, is around following on from the September 28, 2009 stadium massacre and sexual violence in Conakry in Guinea. Survivors co-created a program of interim reparative measures, and after psychological and medical care and compensation, they felt empowered to provide testimony at trial, showing that transitional justice, has different ways of working, and that the IRM can come in earlier and provide the ability to access justice and accountability itself.
Завдяки набутому з 2019 року досвіду, початку існування нашої організації, ми змогли підтримати і допомогти дуже багатьом постраждалим.
Due to the fact that our organization has been existing since 2019, we had already gained experience and we were able to help new survivors after a full-scale Russian invasion 2022.
Особливо кількість постраждалих значно збільшилась з початку масштабного вторгнення Російської Федерації на нашу територію, і організація «Сема Україна» зросла одразу 5 разів.
The cases of conflict-related sexual violence increased horrifically after full-scale invasion, and our organization also became bigger 5 times.
Але збільшилась і кількість активних жінок в організації, і наш голос значно посилився.
But also the number of active women has increased, and it made our voices more loud.
Протягом 24-го року ми взяли участь в 23 міжнародних і внутрішньоукраїнських заходах.
In 2024, last year, we participated to many international and national human rights events, discussions, panel discussions, and different important events on topic of CSW.
Ми активно співпрацюємо з державними органами, беремо участь в розробці законів, розробляємо та впроваджуємо свої проекти.
And we are actively cooperating with government institutions and participate in the development of laws, develop and implement our own projects, such as the rising awareness work in the fields in the occupied territories.
Одним з таких наших проєктів є проведення сесій по підняттю обізнаності на полях, так званих полях на віддалених територіях, де окупованих, де проживає дуже багато постраждалих жінок.
And this project of raising awareness in fields on the occupied territories is a very important project for us because we work with communities directly and we can reduce the level of stigma there.
Це дозволяє знижувати стигму, дозволяє виявляти нових переживших і поширювати інформацію про існуючі проміжні репарації, які надає глобальний фонд виживших.
So it's not only helping to reduce stigma, it's also help to find the new survivors who remain silent, but it also help us to share information about these temporary reparations provided and which were developed with the help of Global Survivors Fund.
Ми змогли передати свій досвід новій чоловічій організації, яка заснувалася в 24-му році.
And it's unique that also we could share our experience that we already had since 2019 and share this experience with the newly founded men's survivals organization in Ukraine in 2024.
І ця співпраця з чоловічою організацією значно поширила наші спроможності, що надало нам можливість написати лист, в якому ми закликаємо внести Російську Федерацію як злочинця в список ганьби.
And this cooperation with the Men Survivors organization, it also strengthened, they give us also power so we empowered each other, and together we wrote a letter to the UN General Secretary Antonio Guterres with a call for action to put Russia on the shame list for CSW crimes in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we heard, I was advocating for long-term funding, but hearing that SEMA Ukraine was in the position to respond quickly in 2022 because they had been established prior to the current invasion and were able to scale up was thanks to long-term support and funding from the Mukwege Foundation. Now I'd like to ask another question. In what ways can recognizing survivors as experts contribute to change in GB initiatives? How do GB initiatives look differently when survivors are in the lead? Tinabeth.
Thank you again. This approach for us practically proved for us that this is sustainable, efficient, effective, trustworthy, and credible. And we can think of various ways. The way we do it, for instance, is we provide appropriate training. But most important thing is for us having trust in these community members and respect their integrity and local knowledge is the most fundamental thing. Localization and shifting the power are our signature in survivor-led approaches. We invest in these community members and the survivor-led initiative. It means that we are believing in them in general. So we recruit and engage them as a protection experts in our various projects with appropriate training and engage them for extended period of time. It can be as a volunteers in the process of identification of the survivors, but also as case managers, identifying the people, the women and girls who have been challenged with this issue, and also for them to be to have a proper report mechanism to the justice system, as well as to help them to manage the possible stigma and ostracization by their community members. To give a practical example, in one of the regions that we are implementing the GBV work, we have 25 female community members who are trained and also motivated by some stipend, and they are handling cases of GBV survivors in their community. So by doing that, we practically recognize and we value their contribution, their knowledge, their especially their connection with the community, because these female case managers are well known by their own community, which means they have a trust that they will be supporting them. So these are some of the ways that we recognize them.
Thank you, and thanks for that explanation. I think when we did the continuum and did the research, a lot of initiatives go from survivor-centered to survivor-led and back, and there can be some flux there. I think you explained that well. So Ruth, over to you.
Sure. So just to reiterate again, that in recognizing that survivors are the knowledge holders on their needs, you can actually not only address past violations, but you can reshape societal norms, both national and international, and create longer term systemic change. And Ambassador Mythen and Katrien and Róisín have spoken about, an increasingly tightening fiscal space and tightened funding space. And survivors themselves are often told that there isn't enough money for reparations. But conversely, we've seen a report by our survivor-led partner organisation, the Association of Detainees and the Missing Persons of Sednaya Prison, that the Assad regime confiscated a staggering $1.5 billion worth of assets from Syrian detainees since the revolution began in 2011. And so simultaneously, as they were arbitrarily detaining and forcibly disappearing tens of thousands of people, the money taken from them was essentially fueling a system of torture and sexual violence. And so these survivors are now actively calling for the confiscation and repurposing of Assad assets held worldwide to fund reparations. And to them, this is a just, necessary, and achievable form of financial accountability. And I really think that this call to confiscate the Assad assets for reparations is not only about reparation for individual survivors, it also becomes about reshaping norms on financial accountability and ensuring that perpetrators and those complicit in these heinous crimes don't profit from those crimes. I'm short on time there, but we have other examples as well.
Хочемо поділитися одним з найважливіших своїх досягнень своєї організації, тим, що за ці роки ми змогли стати просто з переживших експертами в своєму напрямку.
No? Oh, okay. Yeah, we want to share with you actually one of our main achievement that from just survivors, from just a small invisible group of survivors, we became an experts and we involved in many important processes on also on a governmental level. And I will talk now more about these examples. For example, there is one example of Bardina law, and we took active part in the adoption of law 4067, like we also call it Bardina law, and it's a law on legal and social protection of victims of sexual violence as a result of Russia's armed aggression against Ukraine and immediate temporary reparation. We ensure that this law recognizes survivors of conflict-related sexual violence as victims. Our main goal is to ensure that this law doesn't remain just on paper, which is why we participate in the Integracy Working Group in subgroups. One of these groups is access to justice and accountability, and second group is reparations and compensations. Also in early February, we joined a strategic session to develop key provisions, and we work to ensure that this system work effectively and that interaction, that we will also have this interaction between survivors and authorities. So we are not just a tool, that we are active participant in all these processes. And also important to mention that both women and men survivors are working on an implementation of this law. And mention very also shortly that thanks to Global Survivors Fund, we had this unique, absolutely unique experience of developing a system of this reparations. And with the help of Global Survivors Fund, which also collaborate with Ukrainian governmental institutions, we provide help to almost 500 survivors. And from many experts, we've heard that it's actually first time in the history in the world that during the ongoing war, survivors receiving reparations. And also this law, which I mentioned, Bardina law, it's also unique example that this law was developed and started to be implemented during ongoing war. So we think that the survivors leadership models, empowering resilience and activism, reducing stigma, and also encouraging others to seek help, because we are showing example that being actively involved in these processes, it's a kind of a model. It's also model of not only that we can be sure that our voices will be heard, but we can be also confident in our fight, in our fight for justice and our fight with stigma. And I think this is the end of answering this question. And after, I don't know how we will switch to film.
Thank you for that powerful intervention. We are now going to see, it's a 3-minute short video that Elisa has produced and directed. And it's a trailer for a longer feature film documentary about the conflict-related sexual abuse in Ukraine. When we finish this film, then we'll open it to the floor to questions and answers. Just a caution that it is, oh, sorry, I'll let Rina explain more.
Yeah, I wanted to talk, I have a little bit of time. I'm a survivor and I'm documentary director. So it's, unique time for us in Ukraine that we are combining so different roles. And it's striking, and it's also terrifying that you can be survivor, you can be activist, you can be volunteer, you're a survivor and you're documenting these crimes, and you can be soldier. And so we are kind of combining all of these roles in Ukraine. We have no other choice. And actually, just to give a bit of background, how I became also active member of SEMA Ukraine in 2014. It's already almost 11 years ago. While filming the beginning of the Russian invasion of Donbass, I was captured, interrogated, and raped by a Russian counterintelligence officer. And later, when I testified, it turned out that I was only one woman who started to speak publicly and openly about such a crime in Ukraine. And it wasn't because I was the only one, but because it was a huge wall of stigma and silence. And this wall began to break down with a foundation by Irina Dovgan in 2019 of SEMA Ukraine, with also great help of Dr. Denis Mukwege Foundation. And this first Ukrainian NGO united women survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. And it was also time when I became a part of this community. With the full-scale war, 2022, we saw this horrific scale of crimes. And these cases increased, and we felt that we have to make our voices louder. We have to raise our voices globally, and that's how we started to work on this documentary film, Traces. It's a multi-character story following 6 courageous Ukrainian survivors of conflict-related sexual violence who step out of the shadow of the victim, speak out, and show their resistance to Russian aggression. It documents war crimes, but it also highlights the power of women's resilience and solidarity, how we Ukrainian survivors uniting to support each other, where we get the strength to move on, and how we turn our testimonies into a reverse powerful weapon. For me personally, it was a very difficult journey because it was my experience and I had to listen again and again, hours of testimonies about a very painful experience, which always brought me back to my painful experience. But I also felt this mission. And I believe that this film can be also a powerful tool in our advocacy work, and that we can speak from inside our organization, because this film is created by survivor, me, and with the participants of survivors, work characters, main characters, and member of SEMA Ukraine. With this film, we want to make our voices louder, and we believe that a cinema can create this unique emotional key that can open door on the other level of feelings and understanding us survivors. And now we can watch a short teaser of this film, which will come to be released, I hope during the summer. Thank you.
Чи даєте ви згоду на запис ваших свідчень?
Так, я даю згоду.
Темна ніч, і раптом я бачу у вікно солдата із автоматом у руці. І тільки я відкрила, удар прикладом автомата в обличчя. Він мені однією рукою закрив рота, тому що я почала кричати. І він мене роздягнув і зґвалтував.
Я вискочила на вулицю, побігла. І вони погнали за мною. Завалили мене мені під ножку. Я упала і почали мене бити ногами. Соглашайся, сука, по-хорошому. А то зараз я стрілю.
Вони мені до вказівних пальців наділи металеві такі щипці. Коли вони вже мене вдарили током, то я вже зрозуміла, що воно таке.
Виходячи із кухні, він пригрозив мені і сказав: «І тільки пісне, я тебе цим патроном уб'ю». Про дітей є, але ти ніхто. Нічого зробити не можеш. Ні рук, ні ніг, ні обличчя.
Мені часто снився один сон. Що я повернулась на Донбас, що я заходжу в свій садочок, я йду через нього і рукою торкаюсь листів своєї улюбленої черешні. Дерева для мене – це дуже важливо. Почавши життя заново тут, на Київщині,
перше, що я почала робити, це саджати дерева. І я завжди відчувала, що якщо я залишусь нещасною і зламаною, то вони досягли того, чого хотіли вороги. Диви, киця, киця. Насильство досі не подолано світовою спільнотою саме через те, що всі ці випадки замовчувались. Сема на мові суахілі, то це просто не мовчи. І ми назву організації взяли таку ж. Дуже просто і зрозуміло. Не мовчи. Ми не мовчимо. Ви нас чуєте?
Thank you, Rena. Thank you for that powerful film. Maybe just from everything you've heard and seen, I'll ask people to just take a deep breath, maybe shake out your hands and just pause and take a few deep breaths just to breathe out to acknowledge what we've seen and heard. And thank you for that. Okay, so taking a moment now, does anybody wish to ask a question? We have a couple of microphones. And if you could maybe introduce yourself and the question, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Halina Kotlyuk. I work for Henry Bell Foundation in Kyiv, Ukraine. I would like to thank all of the speakers for presenting their work and for doing what you are doing. This is extremely important. And my question is, because we talked a lot about funding, sustainable funding, long-term funding, this is the key to make GPV and CRSV response sustainable. But unfortunately, what we are facing now is that funding cuts all over the world. So my question is, what are your perspectives on that? Do you see any alternative fundings that can come to the countries that are affected by CRSV, Ukraine among those countries? And what can we do to ensure that organizations will get the sustainable funding? Thank you.
Thank you. We might take one or two other questions, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Josephine Saidu. I'm the CEO of Teach for Sierra Leone. First of all, I want to thank the government and people of the Republic of Ireland for supporting our work for the last 3 years and all the panelists for such an incredible presentation today. We are currently working with kids in Sierra Leone in rural schools, and we've been faced with quite a lot of challenges with regards to school-related gender-based violence. And one question I want to ask the survivors here is, how or where do you find strength? Just looking at the video there, I'm actually being emotional right now because that's some of the challenges we're having with most of the survivors around being broken. And sometimes we'll tell them, you remain broken, obviously they win. So that's something that reaffirms what we've been saying. But where do you find strength, in carrying on? Because that's something we want to also imbibe in the kids or the girls who've been affected. And also I want to know, I know there's no quick fix around this because these are kids, being traumatic. It's like a process. Or is there any alternative other than just having the survivors getting some sort of funding, or maybe the perpetrators being involved in all of the conversations? That's something I want to learn from here. Thank you.
Thank you. Question online?
Yeah, we do. We have a question from Dr. Sally Ann Corcoran from the National University of Ireland in Galway. And her question is, while there has definitely been progress advancing the normative framework regarding conflict-related sexual violence, what practices have been most effective in getting countries to bring perpetrators to justice? And she gives an example of Mali, where sexual justice cases have not been yet adjudicated.
Thank you for those questions. Maybe I'll go with the funding one and the legal one to you, Ruth, or not? I think you were particularly asked about the GBV survivors for school-related. I don't know if Action Aid also works on that or not. Jinahan? So maybe we'll go to you first and then to Alyssa and Rena, and then maybe to Kinweb. Thank you.
Sure. Well, the funding question is a great one. And I want to say, first and foremost, there is money out there. Prioritization is the issue. And so we need to talk about that first and foremost. People are saying there isn't money. There is money. And the second thing I'd like to say about the money for Ukraine specifically, there's 300 billion in Russian sovereign assets frozen internationally that need to be repurposed. And a significant percentage of those assets must be allocated to victims and survivors of the most heinous crimes. So not just for defense and other very important priorities, it would send a very strong message if a significant portion of that is allocated to survivors. And just, thinking about the amounts out there, that's 300 billion in sovereign assets, 50 billion or more in oligarch and Russian private assets of sanctioned individuals that needs to be confiscated. And this is just one innovative method, but it's demonstrative of the fact that when survivors issue a call, they can find very just and interesting ways to achieve accountability in the face of a complete lack of accountability globally. I'm going to leave it there for that one, and maybe we'll come back to the legal one after.
So a question on school-related gender-based violence, but more about how you find the strength to keep continuing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not an easy question, because from one side we have the strength, and from another side, every day we are looking again and again for the strength, because we are living in war, and it's not something which finished. So it was a trauma, and after it finished, and you can recover. But in the process of recovery, we and other survivors, we are living in extreme conditions during like almost every day, some like bombings, and with lots of stress. So it's like, I don't know, 10 times more complicated to find the strength. But me and Rina, we had this already long way, because we survived in 2014. And we felt that we just have no right to fall, to give up. And we also feeling that our fight is helping others. And it's a healing process, actually, when you are helping a new survivor who just started to speak out, and you can give her hand, you feel that you healed also. We had an absolutely unique example. 1 year ago, we recorded the first testimony of woman who survived sexual violence in Kherson region in a small village. Her house was bombed. She was absolutely isolated. Her family was in another city. And he was crying every day, and village community started to ignore her because they were thinking, why she's crying? We are all in a hard situation. And she was in the horrible conditions. And after we recorded her testimonies, we started to help her. We organized her some travel to retreats. And after 5 months, I saw how she transformed, and she became a woman who started to smile. And for me, it's something which gives strength when you see this kind of example. I think it's the most powerful example which can give you strength. And I think it's for Irina too, because Irina worked a lot with many survivors from the very first testimony. And she also saw this many transformations. And yeah, I want to emphasize on this, especially this inspiration for us. Thank you for this question.
Just very briefly on the legal question, and although GSF really focuses on the promotion of administrative reparation programs in tandem with legal accountability, just want to say, it is a struggle. The access to justice from the legal sense in terms of very high evidential requirements, even at the international level in the ICC, but we have had some wins. We need to look to those, and ongoing with the ICC is a really great example of CRSV related crimes we prosecuted successfully, but then the perpetrator is found indigent and there's no money for reparations, and the ICC Trust Fund for Victims has to try and come up with that money and get that to the core. So although there is a sense of justice from that, you know, we need more money in the system.
Just to briefly say about the funding issue, I think it has been, we feel like the gender work in general is being attacked by so many actors. That is so unfortunate, which means we need to have re-strategize and come up with a different tactic to continue to support our work. In a given setting like in my country, for instance, the area of protection and the humanitarian fund is very, very little. It's more usually not even more than 5% of the entire funding. And the whole humanitarian plan has never been reached even 50% funding. So you can imagine how little this being given an emphasis. So that means we need to come up with a different model. For instance, establishing, you know, some social enterprises that, you know, funding will flow consistently, continuously, sustainably, and also in a very flexible and quality manner. Coming to the school GBV case, yes, that's very critical. So what we support in action in Ethiopia to schools is first having, you know, code of conduct for the school community. To discipline, because some of this violence actually is committed by the teachers themselves for a number of reasons, right? And also educating the children and pushing and advocating that human rights and GBV will be part of the curriculum. We also support schools in establishing girls club and the councils as well. And we link it with our community structures that we call them women watch groups. These are the groups, community members, women organized in the community to consistently fight and challenge harmful traditional practices. So their main work is to educate and sensitize the community, but also creating linkage with the justice system. We also support parent, teachers, and student associations in every single school setting. That is as one of our accountability mechanism, and the school counseling supports. And we also construct, normally we construct blocks, provide desks, you know, because we center girls. And safety rooms is one of our structure that we construct. This means for girls to have a restroom, washing facility, and also menstrual pads, so that they will continue to come to school. Because the more they are staying at home, the more they are exposed to various forms of violence. So this is what we are trying to do to prevent this from to happen.
Thank you so much, Tinabeb, and thank you to all our panelists. And I can see it's tough sharing what you've shared and seeing it on the screen. And I really appreciate all the efforts that you've gone to in your work, and both being here today, all of you. This work is not easy and it's challenging, and I want to really applaud your work. And maybe we give a round of applause to the panel. I think you've really painted the picture of, as Katrien had mentioned, the intergenerational trauma and consequences that gender-based violence can produce, and the huge work that's involved in preventing it, recovering from it, trying to stop its effects. You know, we've heard we needed the power of action to get us going. We've heard of the effects, the call for funding, and some really interesting new ways of seeking funding. Let's get it back from the people who took it, from the Assad regime, from the Russian oligarchs that have taken this money from survivors and used that to inflict further harm on them. That's where we should be calling for the funding. Yes, our traditional donors are struggling, but what about new methods to get funding? And hear that from survivors. They're coming up with these ideas. You know, we hear about the great work going on in Ethiopia with school groups and how to prevent GBV from happening, keep the girls in school. But when we put survivors at the center, it's sustainable, it lasts longer, it's transformative, and that also is a better use of funds. And if we document that, we can seek funding more easily. So I won't begin to try and recap on everything everyone said. I think we've had a really rich discussion, and I want to hand over to Dr. Asata Mahoy to close. But before doing so, just really to thank our panelists, Tinebe Burhan, Ruth Quinn, Ivana, Irina Dovgan, and Alyssa Kovanchenko, and our previous speakers, Ambassador Fergal Mythen and Katrien Coppens for speaking and opening today. And thanks to the Permanent Mission and the Ambassador for hosting, and Sierra Leone for co-hosting. I just do also want to thank Ivana, who's helped us here, and to Sive and Quiva and the team. And a final thank you to Niamh O'Connor McCabe, who's not here. She's in Dublin, and she did a huge lot of work getting us all here today and getting everything ready. So thank you, Niamh. And over to Minister Satama.
Let us clap for our panelists again. I'm the moderator for this panel. I want to say thank you very much for making us very much glued to the process itself. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Ambassador, I bring you greetings. And Madam Katrien Coppens, I want to say I feel very privileged to be part of this gathering, and to also thank my colleagues that came all the way from Sierra Leone to join me here, and every other person seated here. Distinguished panelists, you've done a great job. I feel very grateful for being part of this, to listening to the stories also from our friends. Let me thank the Irish Consortium on Gender-Based Violence for organizing this side event. And I am thrilled by the statement delivered this morning in providing a comprehensive service for survivors of sexual gender-based violence. We are familiar with using survivor-centered approaches. And today, we are encouraged to transition to survivor-led accountability. I am very grateful. The theme for this event could not have come at a better time. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, some 30 years ago, women from around the world gathered in Beijing to craft a path to empower women and girls. One of the 12 critical areas of concern was end violence against women and girls. Sadly, though we are still confronted with this menace, today our focus is GBV survivors, leading the way to change, recognizing that nothing can be achieved for survivors without survivors in the forefront. It is very clear. We have seen the testimony here today through what they have discussed about, and also through the documentary we've just seen. Distinguished delegates, we have presented an opportunity this morning to reshape our work with GBV survivors in our respective communities. The Irish GBV Consortium on Gender-Based Violence work collaboratively with my ministry, and we have good working relationships from the individual partner to the level of consortium. It is with profound gratitude that I register the Government of Sierra Leone's appreciation to the Embassy of Ireland in Sierra Leone for their support in our work to end violence against women and girls. My ministry provides leadership and coordination on gender-based issues in the country, and will place a premium on a multi-sectoral approach to addressing these issues, especially issues that has to do with school-related gender-based. We work with the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Social Welfare, the Ministry of Education, because only one ministry cannot do it alone, even civil society organization. So we encourage everybody to work together, otherwise we'll not be able to achieve our desired goal of having zero GBV. We have established several mechanisms, both at normative and operative levels, to the goal of ending violence against women and girls. In the last few years, we have witnessed sustained efforts to address sexual and gender-based violence through the passage of robust legislations, such as the Sexual Offences Act of 2012, as amended in 2019, and the recently enacted Prohibition of Child Marriage Act of 2024, which criminalizes marriage of all types for girls under age 18. In addition to the legislative frameworks, we have also rolled out several strategic interventions that have strengthened service provision for survivors. Prominent among them are these one-stop centers that we have established for service provision, which work contemporarily to the non-governmental Rainbow Initiative. In addition, we have a sexual offenses model court, a toll-free helpline for rape, a revised SGB referral protocol, and a HEAL referral pathway, and the introduction of GBB information management system, among others. Today's two presentations and learning outcomes, namely survivor-centered structures and approaches in the government's policy, formation and implementation in Ireland, and from survivor-centered to survivor-led, ICGBV's research on survivor-led accountability initiatives will go a long way to enhancing our quality of care for our survivors. So every day we keep learning, we keep changing, because we want actually to change the narratives when it comes to supporting SGBV survivors. Our panelists have further shed light on different dimensions of handling SGBV issues from various cultural backgrounds. However, there is also some caution that in Sierra Leone, for people that followed the history, we had over 50,000 women and girls, over 10,000 of children, including boys and girls, were displaced and suffered tremendously during the war. A lot of those women that were conscripted by the fighting forces were not clearly catered for during reparations. It is something that we are still dealing with today in our country, especially for sexual gender-based violence survivors. It's sad because all the people, like the amputated people, benefited from reparations, but sexual gender-based survivors suffered and they never benefited. So we have to take note for wars going around in Africa, Ukraine, and other areas. When preparing reparations package, we must consider sexual gender-based survivors because they are very critical. Imagine women or girls being raped, carrying a pregnancy, having that child without knowing who the father is. And you have to suffer all along alone with that child carrying that pregnancy. It is very traumatic. So the problems we're facing today with our young people is as a result of many of those things that we went through. Let me conclude by encouraging all of us and all the consortium members to return home and integrate what we've learned today as we move from survivor-centered approaches to survivor-led approaches, enhancing our accountability. We want to see the survivors at the forefront. We want them to lead the initiatives. They say, he who feels it knows it. So we should put them at the center of it all. Thank you for your attention, and thus it is my singular honor to declare this event for CSW69 closed. This is my last event.
Thank you, Minister, and it's been a serious engagement over 2 weeks, and we commend you for that. I don't detain you much longer. I just want to say, I meant to say at the start, I wanted to thank my team for setting up the room, for convening and imagining this event, particularly Quiva and Andrea, but our entire team. They were setting up chairs yesterday evening, they'll be breaking them down this evening, and we couldn't do these events without them. So just a big thank you to our team, to all our panelists and speakers for your action and activism, for your witness, your testimony, your strength. We who are sitting here are just humbled by what you do each and every day, and we stand with you. And finally, I want to finish with the words of President Michael D. Higgins. You quoted our president earlier. In his Patrick's Day message this year, he spoke about the dangers of the language of inevitability. And I'll just quote, he says, "If we allow the language of inevitability to take hold, if we accept that war is inevitable, that inequality is inevitable, that environmental destruction is a necessary cost of progress, then we abandon the possibilities of transformation, not just for ourselves, but for future generations." And I know that he would readily allow me to include the inevitability of gender-based violence there We know his activism in this space. So let us never accept the inevitability of gender-based violence. Let us always work and drive on to eradicate it. And let's never close off the possibility of transformation. Thank you very much.